Paul Brown turned to his scouts in the draft to offset the loss of Otto Graf.
Greet some boys who might help next year. Bill Plum is at left, Jim Brown in the center. Brown is the Syracuse All-American, the first-round choice.
And when we drafted him, I thought he was going to be a great back. It turns out that, for my money, he's the greatest running back of all time.
Jim Brown injected some soul into the NFL. He was a man whose action footage speaks louder than words. In 9 NFL seasons, Jim Brown never missed a game while gaining more yards and scoring more touchdowns than any other back in history. Today, Jim Brown lives in Beverly Hills, California. He makes his living as an actor, although he looks like he still has a few 100-yard games left in him.
I was very happy to play for Paul Brown because Paul was very strict. He was the king. Well, there wasn't anyone that counted other than Paul. In other words, he ran a very efficient organization. There weren't any cliques. Racism didn't really play a part in it. All you had to do was deal with him. If you dealt with him successfully, then you were all right. You didn't have to worry about the other guys.
We'd try to use Jim Brown all we could because, well, as we used to say, why shoot a pop gun when you got a cannon? The rivalry then developed between, at least on the New York media's part, between Sam Huff and Jim Brown.
This thing sort of developed about Sam was keying on Jim Brown. Well, when you played the Browns, you had to key on Jim Brown. We had Andy Robustelli and Greer and Modulewski and everyone back there keying on Jim Brown.
They played a team defense based on a concept that they developed. And when they came up against the Browns, they knew I was going to carry the ball a certain amount of times, so they studied my stance, where I would lean on certain plays. They would call out numbers, and yet we would manage to beat them a few times, you know, so it was a good rivalry.
While the Browns, Jim and Paul, won their share of skirmishes, by 1957, the battle had begun to swing toward the giant defense. Still, it was always a struggle.
Dick Nolan, who was our defensive safety, little guy, Nolan, we used to call him Sticks. He didn't weigh 180 pounds. He came up and really hit Jim Brown head on and got him. It was some shot. And I came over and I picked Nolan up. And I said, "Hey, Dick, I'm sorry I didn't get there in time, but great tackle. You really got him, And he says, "Great tackle, hell." He says, "I couldn't get out of his way."
Stories about Jimmy Brown, of course, are legend. It's interesting, I think, you could look at the statistics of Jim Brown and say the guy was a great athlete. But there's really no telling exactly how great an athlete the man was.
He may have been the finest lacrosse player who ever lived. Imagine giving a guy like Jimmy Brown at 6'3" and 235 pounds a stick. And he was a fine basketball player. He played varsity basketball at Syracuse University as well. He could do most anything. And on the football field, he was the greatest runner, as Paul Brown has said, who ever played the game.
And I think that's almost a universal feeling, too. 1958, the rivalry between the two teams maybe was as intense as ever.
Absolutely. And I think because every game was critical. And the personalities on the two ball clubs were also so outstanding, so aggressive, and so warmly felt by the fans in both cities. After all, that giant squad with Modulewski and Greer and Huff and Patton, as well as the offensive players like Alex Webster and Frank Gifford and Kyle Rote and Charlie Connolly, the personalities of those ball players lent themselves to the rivalry as well.
The Giants essentially were conservative